See the little red light?
Can you smile?
Smile?
Tater bug.
Yeah, you're gonna say, I'm a tater bug.
Yeah.
I'm not a tater bug.
No, you're not a tater bug.
Well, Grant, who is that you're sitting with?
Uncle Leslie.
It is.
Uh-huh.
Is he your buddy?
Of course he is, isn't he?
Well, give him to tell you a story.
Tell me a story.
Tell you a story? Oh, I want to tell you about my dog. I had a dog named Bob. And, well, we got him, went down to visit this lady. And this little dog was there, she was going to drown him. She said he was mad. He would eat eggs. He bottom the chickens. And I said, give him to me, give him to me, give him to me, little dog, little brown, black dog. And my mother said, will you take care of him? And I said, sure, I'll take care of him. You know I'll take care of him. So I took him home. He became old Bob. He became a very big dog. He wouldn't let anybody bother me. If you came around me, he'd show his teeth. Wouldn't he? He'd show his teeth. He wouldn't let anybody bother us at all. Old Bob was my buddy. I'd go to school, all I'd get rid of him to go to school was push him, get him in the kitchen, shut the door, and I'd go out the room door.
Tell the story about your mother and being valedictorian.
But my mother being, oh well. I guess I better start back and tell us about going to school the first day.
Right. No, don't tell that.
His
What?
mother be quiet.
That's enough.
Is she recording all that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, me. Well, in 1919, I was going to a little country school called what's that school called, Iffy? Glenwood School. You got it?
Mm-hmm.
I was going to this country school. I was in the 4th grade. There were 3 of us in the 4th grade. Well, in the World War I, my Uncle Hiram was killed. He'd only been in a short time. He killed 2 days before the war ended, and I was real upset about it. So I talked to my teacher about. We talked about the president trying to get the League of Nations bill passed through Congress, and he couldn't get it passed, so we would have more wars. And I asked my teacher, I said, what can we do? And he said, well, so you have to get elected to Congress, you have to get elected. I said, well, how do you get elected? And he says, you can't get elected going to school here. So you ought not to be going to school here, you should be going away with school. And I said, well, I want to be elected. So he says, well, I have to talk to your mother and your daddy about it, and he did. He stopped and talked to them, and they said, well, if I wanted to go to Waverly School, it would be all right with them. My daddy didn't care whether I went or not. My mother thought it might be a good opportunity. So Mr. Gray, Mr. Knight, who was the superintendent, talked to Mr. Gray, the principal of the Waverly Grammar School, and got me transferred to the Waverly School. So that was a midterm. The middle of school only went till December the 15th, and then we were out until the following July. But on January 2nd, 1921, I went my first day to the Waverly School. I walked 3 miles on this little country road, and there were only 2 houses in between my house and Waverly, 3 miles. And it was cold. It was just as cold as it can be. Trees on both sides of the road, and they'd always come together in the middle of the road. And I got to think about lions and tigers and things and all that, and I was afraid. They're going by myself. But it was cold. When I finally got to Waverly, it took me 1 hour and 15 minutes to walk over there. So I walked up to the front door, and this little boy came to the door, and I said, I want to see the teacher. And he said, just a minute. And he went back and got another little boy and brought him out there. And the second little boy was named Ecky Gray, and he was the son of the principal. And he said, you want to see the principal, I guess. I said, well, I reckon I do. But I just about made up my mind not to go to school there, and by the time I was so cold. So Mr. Gray took me in and he talked about going to school, about what I would have to do. And how I'd have to come in and be there at 8 o'clock in the morning and leave at 3:15, have to walk his 3 miles. And I didn't know whether I wanted to do it or not. But he said I had to pay a nickel for ink. They furnished the ink. Then I had to pay $2.50 a month to come at the time. Well, then he took me, I told him I was in the fourth, I finished the 4th grade. He says, you haven't finished the 4th grade, so we're just halfway through. He said, you have to go up in the 4th grade. And I went in Miss Dolly's room with him, and he introduced me to her. And she looked terrible. Like it. She said, why me, Lord? Why me? Why me? I had on my old country clothes, or I was not fully clothed, and my mother had made my clothes, and I looked terrible. But she set me down on the right the row to the left of her desk, and I was the third pupil there, and she told me, says, I will not call on you today, so you just observe what's going on. And then when recess came, she said, now you 4th graders. See, Miss Dolly Ford had the 3rd grade and the 4th grade too. She said, now you 4th graders are supposed to have the name of your best friend, the full name of your best friend when you come back from recess. Best friend, I didn't even have a friend, that's the best friend, I didn't know anybody. There was school there were 240 children in the 8th grades, I believe, and I didn't know a single one. So I made up my mind that I would try to make it through the day if I could. And I was out in the hall where it was warm, trying to find somebody to be my best friend. And nobody would be my best friend. They'd stand around and look at me, but they wouldn't be my best friend. And finally a little boy named Ecky Gray said he'd be my best friend, but I couldn't spell it. Then Tom Morris said he would be my best friend. He said, I'd write it down for you, Thomas Carter Morris, and he did. Well, I had my best friend, so I made it through that all right, didn't get a whipping. I don't never know what you wanted for. So, we had music. Our music teacher, Miss Augusta Finch, we call Miss Augusta. And she was teaching us scales. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Last something I never heard in my life. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I never heard anything like that before. I don't know what she's talking about. Well, Miss Dolly, at 3:15 in the afternoon, came time to go home, and she gave me a list of things I would have to get from the bookstore, down Mr. Miller's bookstore. And one was a collegiate dictionary. Well, I'd already decided I wasn't going back. But I went home, and Effie, your grandmother there, met me about 100 yards up the road, and she said, how'd it go? And I said, terrible, I ain't going back. I said, boy, I got a whipping this morning, got 15 licks, so I didn't have the whole work. And I said, I didn't even have a real big whipping. So my mother said, we'll talk about it. And Effie, she said, how'd it go? I said, well, I didn't know. I ain't going back. So she ran on ahead of me into the house, and he ain't going back, he ain't going back, he ain't going back. My mother said, we'll talk about it. And we did that night after we had supper. We were washing dishes, my mother was washing dishes and I was drying it. And she said we would talk. Well, she did the talking and I did the listening. She said, I feel like this is an opportunity for you that a lot of people don't have. So you can go to Waverly School and says you will get an education and you might be able to be a policeman. Said you might be able to work in a grocery store. Said if you're real smart, you might be able to work in an office. Said you might be able to go to high school and learn. And said, now this is the Lord's giving me an opportunity. Said, now we're not going to make you go. Your mother and daddy said, now we going to leave it up to you. So whether you go or not, if you want to go, we'll see that you do go. And we'll do everything we can to see that you do go. And she began to kind of cry a little bit, and I began to cry too. And I said, Mama, I'll go and I'll make you proud. And she said, I know you will. And we both cried that. And so the next morning I went again. I went down to the bookstore and got my books. I got a little satchel. I carried the books on. I think Mr. Miller gave me a little 15-cent satchel on my back. It kind of helped keep my back warm to keep the wind low. And in those books, there was one book that I liked. It was a dictionary, a Webster's Collegiate Dictionary. And I looked up scale, and there it was. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And then the music teacher, Mr. Gusto, was teaching us what she's teaching us scale. And Miss Donna was teaching us the vowels, A, E, I, O, U. Well, there it was, A, E, I, O, U. And I learned that anything I wanted to know, I could find in the dictionary. So that what I would do, I was not smart, I don't claim to be smart, but I would memorize it. I had an hour, it took me an hour to walk home, an hour to come back to school. So I would memorize what's in the dictionary. And every day I would learn whatever they were talking about, it was in that dictionary, that's about it. So the next day when I went back to school, Miss Dolly with the vowels says, now I'm going to give you a test on how to stand up, who knows the vowels. Of course I have my hand up. And she was surprised. And she had me repeat the vowels, A, E, I, O, U. And she was really surprised. Because in the past, the boys that learned all this stuff would be the Slavens and the Lucases and the boy Gray and the boys, the big the head one, the Backer's son and different ones like that. Well, then we had music. Miss Gusta came in, and she said, "Now, when I was in here yesterday we were learning the scale. Now, who knows the scale today?" And she looked surprised. Says, "Mr. Smith," said, "would you stand up and tell us the scale?" And I did. She said, "That's amazing. That's amazing." Oh, I never heard a scale before the day before, and I knew it because I had memorized it in the dictionary. Well, then Miss Dolly started, when she first started her classes, she started her classes. And she called her Johnny Durham. That was Johnny Durham. And asked Johnny if he had arithmetic. He did not have arithmetic. And she says, "Come out in the hall." And she gave him 15 licks with a switch. I never saw Johnny. Johnny didn't make it through the third grade. He failed the third grade. And the last time I saw him, Johnny was driving a taxi, I think, anyway. I never know what happened to him. So then I went January and February, and in March I came in second in my class. And in April I led my class. And I led my class every month through the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade except one. And that was the month that I slipped off from school and went with some boys to see the circus. And Mr. Gray gave me 50 on the performance. And I could not explain to my mother how the 50 on the performance. I'd gone, and at the circus I had a job watering elephants, and you know what a job elephant was thinking. They'd get 5 gallons of water over to them out of the creek, and they'd spew it. But finally I went to school, and it was just like a television show to me. Every day was like a television show. I learned these stories about Ichabod Crane, about Black Beauty and all those stories. Another thing they had, once a month we would have a speaking contest. And we would have to go in and speak before somebody in the high school. At that time, the high school was down there on the second floor. So I won every speaking contest I entered from the time I was in the 5th grade through the 8th grade. Not because I was the best, but because it was a dollar bill. And I won because I studied, I memorized it going and coming to school. And that dollar bill taught me. And we learned things like the Gettysburg Address, and Washington's Farewell Address, and things like that. And I'd win a dollar bill every time. Well, it came time for graduation, and I was valedictorian for my class. And so we went to the graduation ceremony. It was on the second floor there. And the place was seated about 300 people. And we went in a buggy drawn by old Jim. If you remember old Jim, like this now. Oh, my, that was on mule. And we drove in the buggy over there. I carried Mama and Effie and myself in the buggy. And we left Annie and Hiram home with Papa. And we told him not to smoke until we got back, and I'm sure he didn't when we got out of sight. And so we hitched the old mule down to the courthouse there, about hitching rack, and we walked down the school, went up to the second floor, and went through the program. And I was valedictorian. I was the last one to speak. And when I finished, I did not make a single mistake in my speech. I had 2 pages of typing speech to make, and I could make it today almost. Mr. Gray asked my mother to please stand. And he talked about her more than he did about me. He said that she deserved a lot of credit because she had, not only was my husband sent me to school, she had somebody, Effie in school, who, I think Annie was in school at that time too. And she also had us in the Sunday school down at the Memphis church there. And she also was, my dad was blind, she had to run the farm, and he talked about 5 minutes about her. He said, we owe her a standing ovation. So they stood up, and that whole crowd gave her a standing ovation. And I told my mother, I said, Mama, I made you proud. And she said, you sure did. That was it.
That was a wonderful story.
I just wanted 2 stories. Mom,
Plenty of them in there.
he's not over
And you
here.
moved it whenever you turned it on.
He's not up here, sir.
You want me to unpack it for you? Come here, I'll unpack it for you.
I think she
You want
wants
one
to tell the
last?
story
No, I
about
don't
the
want
buggy ride now.
What?
She wants to tell the story about the buggy ride. I think
Buggy
she's
ride.
ready.
Here's
Buggy ride.
my mom.
Come here. You come right here and sit with me.
Okay.
Did you get a napkin for him too?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay.
He wants to tell the story about the wild buggy ride. Is that it? Wild buggy ride? Okay. Well, when I was 12 years old, that was 1923. Yeah, 12 years old. I came into possession of an old buggy chassis. Now, Effie, do you know where that thing came from? I think it came out of scrap pile. Well, it was all to pieces. The wheels had wood spokes, but they were about half gone. I had to put in new spokes, wire them in. And it had iron tires on it. I had to wire that down, wire it down good. And I put some little boards up and down to make a place to sit on. And I filled a little place there in front, like a guide, put a tiny rope on each side, put my feet down there and guide it. And I worked on that old chassis, buggy chassis for, I guess, about 2 weeks, building it, put it together. And I took some axle grease and greased it, axles where the wheels went on, so it rolled real easy, you know. At that time, the state had just built this new highway down by our house and paved it. It was paved. It was not really a 2-lane highway. I guess it was about a 1.5 lane, wasn't it? It wasn't quite 2 lane. Well, so everybody was watching. Effie was watching, Aline was watching, Cecil was watching. Everybody wanted to know when we were going to get to finish the ride. Everybody wanted to ride on it. And I had 3 planks down the middle. 3 planks down the middle, from front to back, you know. Couldn't wide. Well, I don't know. I got the thing finished and got it ready to go. And man, the wheels would spin. Like I say, the city just put that new highway through there and paved it. So on this Sunday morning, we pushed this thing up to the top of Cooley Hill. Pushed it up to the top of Cooley Hill and turned it around and got home.
Daddy.
And I had Effie and Annie, and I had Cecil, Louise, and Aline. I had seven people on that thing. And we turned it around and we started downhill. By the time I made the first curve, I knew I was in trouble because we were going about at least 25 miles an hour. We made the first curve and I lost 2 kids on the first curve. And I knew we were in real trouble. Had no brakes. And I was guiding with my ropes in front of me. And while the land was a slight elevation on, and it seemed like the farther I would go, the faster it'd get. And we went by Susan's house, and going so fast she couldn't even get off. There was no way to get off. And still, and the wheels were coming apart because those wired them together. The wires were worn out, and they were coming up flopping around. And it wasn't by our house. I couldn't turn in the driveway down there and go through the rest. And finally, we got out about a half mile below our house. I stowed kids all the way from the top of the hill down to there. And I didn't know if I'd hurt anybody. I didn't know if I'd killed anybody. Didn't know what happened. But, so I told Cecil, I said, Cecil, we can stop this thing by we'll drag our feet. And I wore out my shoes, and I think he did too. I wore out my shoes and dragging my feet on that rope to stop it. And we quietly pushed that thing back up there. And by our house, pushed it down, and later pushed it back in the scrap pile. But I didn't know, as I used the theme on this thing, the Lord is my shepherd, because he sure had to be. Because, you know, the creek on me, the ditch on both sides, I killed children. And I know I must have been making 10 mile an hour when I passed my house. I couldn't even drive in the driveway. But we pushed that thing back in the scrap pile, and that's where it stayed. So the Lord is my shepherd. I tell you, I had those 7 children on, and I could have killed every one. That's my daddy called that a scrape.
A scrape?
He said I was always getting in scrapes. And I was. Yeah, I'll tell about Effie, because Effie will remember this. Y'all may have heard this before, I may have. Why I believe in Santa Claus, if I have.
Go ahead, tell it.
Well, I've told that one over there too. I mean, these people like these stories. I guess it's corny and country, that's why they like them. Well, why I believe in Santa Claus to this very day. I think the year was 1923, I believe. Maybe 1922. I was in the 5th grade. Now, Effie you were in the 3rd grade or
Don't
2nd
get my
grade?
heart, baby.
I believe you were in the 3rd grade. And I was in the 5th grade. Christmas Day came on Tuesday, I believe. On the Monday before that Tuesday, it was announced in my class that there would be a live Christmas tree with lights and a real live Santa Claus at the Methodist church there in Waverly, and all children were invited. Well, I thought I never have seen a live Santa Claus. I never have seen a live Christmas tree. And so Effie and I talked all the way home. It announced the same thing in her class too, that there would be a live Christmas tree and a Santa Claus, live Santa Claus. Well, maybe not a live Christmas tree, but a live Santa Claus. And all children were invited. So we talked about it all the way home, how we could possibly go. It was cold, man. It was December, and it was cold. It was always cold in that valley and off that hill. And we decided we would go by ourselves. And we got home and we talked to my mother about it. She said, no, so you can't, I would never give you permission for you to go by yourselves. And we didn't know how we could go. So we were real upset about it, because we have a live Santa Claus, a real live Santa Claus. I never seen a Santa Claus. Never seen a live lighted Christmas tree. And everybody was invited, and I might be able to get what I wanted, but I still believe in Santa Claus at that time. So finally my mother said that if my dad would not smoke, and if he would stay home and keep Annie, that we would walk. Effie and my mother and I would walk over there. It was cold, and man, it was windy. And my daddy says, well, I don't see how y'all can do it. It's going to snow. I feel it in my bones. He always feels snow in his bones. So, but I would have gone if I'd had to go in my pajamas. Well, so my mother said she would go and go with us, with our two children, with Effie and me. And we would walk. Well, we did. And it was cold. I had never been so cold in my life. We walked over and we got there about, well, the Christmas tree was 7 o'clock, I think, and we got there just about 15 minutes early. And we sneaked in the back and got on the back row, very back pew of the Memphis church thing. Sitting on the back row. And we were in, well, they were, the little girl was playing the piano, and she's in my class, an excellent girl in my class, she's playing the piano. I saw several people I knew, and had a great big pile of things under the tree down there, gifts, you know, Santa Claus to give out. And we were all sitting there and just talking, having a big time. Suddenly I heard this noise down in the basement. It sounded like somebody dropped about a tub full of tin cans about 50 feet down, and it made the awfulest noise you ever heard. And then I heard splash. He says, "Whoa there, whoa there," to his what's this about? Donna. He said, "Now calm down, Blitzen. Just calm down. Wait a minute, calm down there, Blitzen." And then he came up the steps and had this big pack on his back, and he was puffing in the ball and walking down to the front of the Christmas tree. Well, he said he had a lot to do. He couldn't take up a lot of time, so he had to give out those things on the tree first. And he did. And I didn't get a thing. I didn't get anything. And then I sort of real, F and I both were disheartened because we didn't get a thing. Because nobody sent us any present. And then he reached in his pocket and he said, "I got to stay out of the list here of good boys and girls. The special I'm going to give a present." And he reached over and he pulled out the first name and says, "Lester Smith." And I stood up and I couldn't get up. I began to cry. 11 years old, I began to cry. I couldn't get up. I don't know, just like somebody shot me in the face or something. I couldn't get up. And he says, "He called your name, he called your name." I said, "Well, I was crying, I couldn't get up, you know." So he called out again. Well, I managed to get up. And I walked down the aisle, I was shaking all over like that. And he said, "Leslie, have you been a good boy?" I said, "I sure have." And he gave me a sack of fruit, a 20-pound sack, almost full of fruit. Now, you know how much that thing can weigh. And he said, "Now, Merry Christmas, have a good time, so I'm going to depend on you." And well, I went to stuff. And so I eased back down my pedal. The second name he called Effie. Effie didn't even slow down. I mean, she got up and ran. She went down there in a run. And he did the same thing with her. He gave her a 20-pound sack and got her back. He had a whole list. He had some others that too. I guess all the poor people. But anyway, then the thing went over. He said he had a long place to go. And he was telling everybody goodbye, you know, and stuff. And he was in a big hurry to get out. And so then we couldn't decide how in the world we going home and carry all that stuff home. I mean, you know, a 20-pound sack of fruit is pretty heavy, even for me, for two children. And finally my mother said she'd carry it as far as she could. I'd carry mine, we'd rest a while. Then we'd have to carry some more rest a while. But 3 miles is a long ways to carry this stuff. I mean, there's fruit, bananas, and firecrackers and stuff in there. And oh man, I mean, you talking about good, they're really good. So we walked out of the church and got down there by the street, and we were standing there and talking, and here came a car honking slowly down there and getting the people out of the way. And he stopped right by us. And he said, "Miss Smith, I am supposed to take you home. I'll take y'all home." In a brand new Buick automobile. Well, she says, "Well, that's wonderful, but who are you?" And he says, "I cannot tell you, see that." And we were anxiously into it, so we got in. He said, "Santa Claus sent me." Well, that was all she had to say, was Santa Claus sent me. So sent him, I never knew who he was. He took us home. About 15 minutes we were home, dry, warm, in that brand new Buick, you know. And I never did know who that was. I thought it was Tom Miller. I never did know. But he took us home, and my mother asked him again, so I wish you would tell us who you are so we can thank you for this. He says, I cannot tell you who I am. I said, just say the Santa Claus to me. So you asked me why I believe in Santa Claus? To this very day.
I don't think I've heard you tell that.
You haven't?
But tell us another kind of story. Like,
Or he's getting old now, he might be getting old.
you tired?
No, no. 1945. In 1945, World War II was over on September the 2nd. And of course, the city was having to work real hard, working 48 hours a week. Had so much business they couldn't handle it. Christmas was going to be on Tuesday, and we would be off from Friday through Tuesday. And my problem was that I hadn't been home in so long. I was real homesick for Mama and Papa and Effie and all the whole family. And also Larry was not born yet. Larry was due in February. The doctor told Catherine she couldn't have traveled. And we had just come to the point where we could buy gasoline. You know, you go and fill it up. And I didn't know what I was going to do because from Friday night until the following Tuesday would be off for Christmas. Well, the following Wednesday rather, would be off for Christmas. So, and Catherine, bless her heart, she always knew what to say and when to say it. She couldn't go. She said, I want you to go home and see your parents. She was really good about that. And she said, now, I'll stay here. She says, I'll go over to my mother's and help her with the Christmas cooking. That's what she wanted to do. That's what she wanted to do. And I said, well, I'll take Ronnie. And Ronnie will be 6 years old on Sunday. I'll take Ronnie with me. That'll be his birthday present and take him up to our home place. And I hadn't been up there, and it had been at least maybe a couple of years. It had been a long time. I was once on the train. But we decided to go. We left here, we carried Catherine over to Ms. Martin and left her over there to stay with her mother. And we left here about 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon going to Waverly. Traffic was absolutely bumper to bumper. We didn't have the I-40 like we do now. We had Highway 70, just over 2-lane highway state. Bumper to bumper, and took Ronnie, and we stopped at well, this place up here in Brownsville, and got a hamburger. I don't know what it is.
Douglas.
Not a hamburger, but Boulder. Now,
Okay.
you ready to go ahead? All right. So we left here at 5 o'clock, and the traffic is just absolutely bumper to bumper. We couldn't drive. You couldn't drive fast. We had to go, and we got to look at the fireworks. They had all the farmhouses lined up. See, we never could have lights before for Christmas. I mean, while the war was on. So that's the first time since the war over we could have lights. And then we got to Brownsville and had a big Christmas tree in the courtyard up there. And we got to talking about the Christmas tree, and Ronnie was so happy. His birthday coming up and Christmas too. And so we decided we go through these little towns, we'd try to pick out the one that was the best. Well, the one in Brownsville was the best. We got to Milan, and it was the best. And we got on, kept on going, and the time we got to went through Atwood, Humboldt, we went all up through there, and through Huntington. Huntington was the best. And we would watch for the best lights. The farmhouses that have lights on, there'd be lights all along the highway. And well, of course, when I got to Waverly, that just better than all of us put together, you know.